Welcome to this video short about the Processional Cross at the Fralin Museum of Art. My name is Jordan Love and I am the Carol R. Engel Academic Curator here at the museum. My specialty is medieval art and I would love to discuss this cross in our permanent collection with you today. The image that you see on the left is how the cross looks from the front, and the image you see on the right is how the cross looks from the back. It's known as a processional cross because it was carried in processions through cities on special religious holidays or feast days. You'll notice the bottom has a spike. It would have been fitted into a long staff and carried by particular church officials as they processed through the city. You'll notice that on the front of the cross, you have an image of the crucified Christ. On the end of each arm of the cross, there's a little four-leaf clover shape known as a quatrefoil. In each one is an image of a person. Many of them are holding books or other interesting implements, and I'm going to talk to you about what each of those is today. Here we have two crosses from other museums that appear very similar to the processional cross at the Fralin Museum of Art. The one on the left is owned by the British Museum and dates from 1330 to about 1350. The cross on the right is housed at the Brooklyn Museum of Art and also dates to the 14th century. You might notice some similarities and differences to the Fralin cross right off the bat. The British Museum cross on the left is also similarly made out of a metallic material and has a sculpted crucified Christ attached to it. You'll also notice it has a few quatrefoil shapes attached to it as well. However, instead of large figures on the ends of each arm of the cross, it has these fleur-de-lis shapes. The cross on the right is even more distinct. Instead of sculpted forms attached to the cross shape, it has images of the crucified Christ, the Virgin Mary, and other religious figures painted onto a wood and gold leaf surface. It also has a different base. I believe that this particular cross on the right was instead used upon an altar rather than processed through a town, whereas the cross on the left was probably also a processional cross like the one at the Fralin. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about the processional cross was that it's so poignant for what's going on in our world today with COVID-19 and the issue of pandemics. In history, pandemics were often addressed through processing through the city. It was a form of communal prayer, and church officials felt that if they processed through town, they could implore God and the saints to deliver them from disease. And so, even though they had no idea that processing through a town actually would help to spread disease, they felt that the hope it gave people was particularly important. On the right, you'll see an image of a very famous procession that happened in the year 590. It was when Pope Gregory was addressing the issue of a plague that was wiping through Rome, and he organized a procession and led church officials and citizens through the city. At one point, he saw a vision of the Archangel Michael appear above Hadrian's tomb. He was sheathing his sword, and Pope Gregory felt that it was a sign that the pandemic would come to an end. Because of that, they renamed Hadrian's tomb the Castle of Sant'Angelo after the Archangel Michael. The painting on the right, which depicts this event, is actually located in the Philadelphia Museum of Art and was painted in the year 1500. So where does the Fralin processional cross come from? Well, one thing that we've noticed about our processional cross is if you take a look at the background, here's a detail of the processional cross on the right, you'll notice it has a beautiful blue enamel work painted into the metallic surface. This enamel work is very similar to that done on a chalice that's owned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and a detail of that is on the left. The enamel work is so similar, including the white dots of the flowers in both pieces, that it's very possible that they were both done by the same workshop. The Metropolitan Museum of Art chalice on the left was created in Hungary in about 1460. So it's very possible that our processional cross is also from that area, from that particular time period. Now let's take a look at the figures on our processional cross. You'll notice in each of the quatrefoils there's an image of a person from about hip level up to their head, covered in gold leaf. To Christ's right, we see an image of a woman with a veil, and this is the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary in Christian art nearly always appeared to Christ's right. It was seen as his privileged side. To his left, there usually appeared either John the Baptist or John the Apostle. The youngish looking figure to Christ's left definitely looks like John the Apostle in this particular case. Above Christ's head is an image of an older man. He's carrying a set of keys. This became the attribute of St. Peter, who was given the keys to heaven. At Christ's feet is an image of a woman with long flowing hair not covered in a veil. When a woman is depicted at Christ's feet, it's usually the Mary Magdalene, who, in one of the biblical tales, washes Christ's feet with her hair. This arrangement that we saw with the processional cross is one that was repeated many times in many forms of medieval art over the centuries. You'll notice in this tympanum sculpture at the Great Cathedral of Amiens, located northeast of Paris, that we have the same formula: Christ in the center, with the Virgin Mary at his right hand, and John the Apostle at his left. This, however, is not a crucifixion scene, but instead a scene of the Last Judgment, where souls are being seen weighed by an angel on a scale below. This dates from about the 1200s. You'll notice these two images are very similar to the one on the processional cross, images of the crucifixion. The one on the left was a fresco painted in the Church of San Clemente in Rome by the great artist Masolino in about 1428 to 1430. The one on the right is by Italian artist Francesco Rosselli and was a print created in 1470. You'll notice that the crucified Christ appears very similar in both images and to our processional cross. Masolino has created his fresco with the Mary Magdalene clinging to the base of the cross in a similar fashion to how she appears on the processional cross at Christ's feet. In both of these images, however, the Virgin Mary is seen fainting and is caught by supporters. The processional cross was meant to be seen on both sides, and here we have the back side that would have been visible to people following the procession. Just like the front, there's a figure depicted in each quatrefoil, with once again Christ in the center. Just like St. Peter with his keys on the front, each figure here can be identified either by what they're wearing or what they're holding. In medieval art, these are known as attributes. St. Jerome is on the left, St. Augustine on the top, St. Bartholomew on the right, and the woman at the bottom we believe is either St. Apollonia or St. Agatha. St. Jerome was a 4th century saint who translated the Bible into Latin. He's often depicted with his cardinal's hat. St. Augustine was the bishop of Hippo Regius in northern Africa, in the area of modern-day Algeria. St. Bartholomew on the right was one of the original 12 apostles, who is believed to have brought Christianity to Armenia. Eventually, he was martyred by being skinned alive with a special curved knife, which he holds here to help identify him. The woman at the bottom was either Saint Apollonia or Saint Agatha. Apollonia was a woman from Alexandria, Egypt, who was tortured by having her teeth pulled out with clamps, which may be the objects that she's holding here. She eventually threw herself in the fire rather than converting away from Christianity. St. Augustine, depicted above, actually wrote about her suicide as justified because she was voluntarily becoming a martyr for her faith. It is possible that it's also depicting St. Agatha, who's a 3rd century saint in Sicily. She was tortured and killed for refusing to marry a pagan Roman. Her torture involved cutting off of her breasts with pincers, so that may be what she's holding here. She eventually became the patron saint of breast cancer survivors. St. Jerome did write about her. However, I believe it's St. Apollonia because she's depicted directly below St. Augustine, who wrote about her martyrdom. St. Bartholomew, on the other hand, was written about by St. Jerome, and they're lined up across from each other here in this processional cross. You may remember that St. Jerome also appears in a 16th century painting at the Fralin Museum of Art. Here, instead of wearing his cardinal's hat, he's depicted in a red cardinal's robe. You can see the faint hint of a halo behind his head. He is perhaps translating the Bible here. However, he also wrote a lot of theological texts about the early Christian church, which makes him one of the 4 doctors of the Christian church, the most influential writers in the early history of Christianity. So why were St. Jerome and St. Augustine included on the processional cross? They were 2 of the early doctors of the Christian church, saints recognized as having made a significant contribution to theology or doctrine through their research or writing. The other 2 significant early doctors of the Christian church were St. Gregory and St. Ambrose. You may remember St. Gregory from the painting of the procession in Rome in 590, depicting the Archangel Michael sheathing his sword. Here, the 4 doctors appear in this painting, known as the Disputa, painted by Raphael in 1510 for Pope Julius II. It's located in his office at the Vatican. To the left of the altar, you'll recognize St. Jerome in his red cloak. He's seated next to Pope Gregory with his papal mitre. To the right of the altarpiece are 2 seated bishops. Those are St. Augustine and St. Ambrose. And so the processional cross from the front offers its viewer an image of salvation and reminds the viewer from the back of the writings of St. Augustine and St. Jerome and the martyrs that we're meant to look at as examples of how to live our lives. I hope you've enjoyed this short video about the processional cross at the Fralin Museum of Art, as well as learning about the medieval art and Renaissance art that relate to it and give it historic context. Please join us again for our next video.